Hey everybody, welcome to Psychology Tonight. Because of our unscheduled COVID interruption for tonight, instead of me doing 2 live sessions, I'm just going to record the lecture here and post it for you to watch at your convenience over the next few days. So you can watch it now or tonight or tomorrow or the next day, but please just make sure that you have watched it in full before the class on Monday. And the other thing is there is an exit ticket for January 20th to fill out at the end of class. You can go on the Google Classroom and get the link to the next exit ticket, which will cover the part of the lesson that I was hoping to cover last class, but I'm getting to it now, which is the modern approaches to psychology. And a little bit different than the, kind of the historical approaches. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But before we get going, one piece of housekeeping: Explore EC, that's explorec.maine.edu. If you haven't already, log in. Create an account if you haven't already, and then once you have an account, you'll be able to look at it. There'll be a toolbar near the top of the page, and that will, one of the choices will be take a class at my school or at my high school. I can't remember exactly how it's worded, but if you click on that, because you indicated that you, in your registration, that you are a Bangor High School student, the Bangor High School courses will show up. There'll be 3. There'll be a French class, which is not what you're taking now, and the other 2 will be PSY100 classes. If you typically come to the 4 p.m. class, sign up for the first one in the list. That is a PSY100. And then if you come to the 6 o'clock class, sign up for the second one, because I want to make sure that I have them divvied up. And the university will understand that I'm running 2 sections of the class. So, okay? So that's the only housekeeping. I want to start tonight's class with a little bit of a fun observation that I've just made. My wife and I are not avid lottery participants. We don't typically buy a lot of lottery tickets. In fact, probably over the 28 years that she and I have been married, we have probably purchased a grand total of maybe $200 worth of lottery tickets ever. And usually it's at Christmas. We'll usually buy a lottery ticket to put in either in the kids' Christmas stockings or in one another's. But this week we decided, well, let's splurge. Let's buy some lottery tickets, because Mega Millions is at $850 million for the jackpot, and Powerball is at $730 million for the jackpot. So why not, right? You can't win if you don't play. So we splurged big time. We bought 5 of each, okay? And last night was the drawing for the Mega Millions. We didn't win the jackpot. Neither did anybody else, for that matter. So the jackpot for what would be Friday night, I believe, is going to be $970 million. So, you think about the excitement of that, right? It caught us too. We're like, oh yeah, let's, what would we do with that kind of money? And it was just kind of a fun moment. But out of the tickets, right? We bought five tickets, and there's 6 numbers on each ticket. So 6 times 5 is 30. Out of the 30 numbers possible, I got one number out of all of them. So out of the 4 draws, nothing at all. one of the draws, I got one number, which means I won nothing. So that led me to kind of ask a question, like, so what are the odds, right? What are the odds? If a jackpot is $850 million, well, if there's less than 425 million possible combinations, somebody with $425 million could go out and buy, well, they could buy themselves a win, right? They could literally buy every ticket. So that, all right, what are the odds? The odds of winning the jackpot are 1 in 302,575,350. So you have to buy that many tickets to guarantee that you are going to win the jackpot. But there are other prizes, right, that kind of keep you going. There's a $1 million prize that has a 1 in, and I lost where it is, but anyway, there are decreasing odds. You have, as a chance of winning, you have about 1 in 24 chance of winning a prize. But 8.1 million of those wins would be for a grand total of $2, right, for each. So if I bought one of every possible combination, I'm going to win 8,177,712 $2 tickets, $2 wins. I'm going to win 3,399,723 $4 winners. I'm going to win about a little over 9 million $10 winners. I'm going to win 20,800 $200 winners, 7,800 $500 winners, 325 $10,000 winners, and I'm going to win 24 million $1 million prizes, potentially, right? So it's and then the jackpot for 970 million. So you think, okay, yeah, well, it's going to win more money. Well, first of all, I have to come up with $605 million to buy every ticket. And then I need somebody to fill out those tickets so that we get one of every one of them. So I'd have to hire literally a crew of people to create those tickets. Then there's a little bit of fly in the ointment, because if there's a second winner, if somebody else wins the jackpot, that means the 970 million would be split two ways. So literally, by buying every ticket once and adding up the total of all of the prizes, I would actually lose $282,479,000. So lotteries are extremely successful for a reason, because there's a lot of people that lose. So when you think about the odds, my odds of winning a prize is 1 in 24. So tickets like these, I would have, if I buy 5 at a time, it's going to take me 5 weeks to win one prize. The heavy odds on favorite is that it's going to be a $2 winner. So 5 times 5 is 25. So I'm going to have to spend $50 to have the odds, not to guarantee, but to have the odds of winning $2. So if you've beaten those odds and you've won $2, then congratulations. But to spend 50 to get 2 is not something that is very, very good in your favor. So as I say that, what has that got to do with psychology? There's the psychology of the excitement. It's fun, and you know, when a husband and wife sit around talking like, well, what would we do with $970 million? What would we even do with $1 million? Is a fun conversation. And so people get very, very excited about it. Now, it's also important to note later on, I'll probably bring up lotteries again because it will be part of our abnormal behavior unit or psychological disorders, because compulsive gambling is in the DSM-5 as a recognized mental disorder. So play responsibly. If you're 18 and you want to buy a lottery ticket, play responsibly. This will probably be the last lottery ticket that I buy for many, many months. And if I win, I will probably have to teach this class from a secure location somewhere, probably in the Caribbean. So if there's a sandy beach behind me the next time you see me, then that means that I won $730 million, okay? But don't hold your breath. As a matter of fact, if I win $730 million, maybe we could all go to that sandy beach to have class for the rest of the year, right? That would be fine for social distancing, I think. Anyway, let's move into the unit that we're talking about. I hope that was kind of a fun way to introduce the lesson. But what we want to talk about are modern approaches. So basically these overarching theories that govern the way a particular attitude towards psychology is used. So what that means is every psychologist has a theory and that their practices are based on. And that's kind of what we're going to look at. We're going to look at 6 or 7 of the main approaches to psychology as they exist today, as opposed to the historical ones, which kind of introduce the idea of introspection and thinking about the world around us and how it affects our behaviors, but also how some of our internal processes affect our behavior also. Now remember, that's the ultimate direction that we're heading with psychology, is looking at behavior. Because whether it's caused by something out there or whether it's caused by something in here, what we're really looking at is how we act as human beings towards ourselves, towards others, for the common good, so to speak. Okay, so let's talk about these modern approaches. And so I'm the only one that's in color here, except for the dog and the cats, right? So I should smile along with them. I don't know if you remember from the lesson where we were talking about the historical approaches, they were always very stern-looking men with scowls on their faces and furrowed brows. They looked like they were very angry, unhappy people. But when you look at these people, Abraham Maslow over here has a big smile on his face, and most of them have like a subtle grin at least, and they seem to be a little bit more positive, at least in their affect and their approach to what they're talking about. So we're going to talk about some of the very basic foundations and framework of these perspectives. And so I have a picture of a meme of a cat, and that has this little kitten rolling around. But if any of you have an electric can opener and you've ever used an electric can opener to open a can of cat food, and the cat figures out that the sound of the can opener equals I'm getting something to eat, you can definitely see a change in the behavior of the cat, right? We keep cat food for our cats, if they might even make an appearance during this class. But we keep the cat food in a particular closet, and we use dry food. So when we go into that closet, the cats automatically come running because they think we're going in there to get them something to eat. So we can see the impact of behavior of an action, and we can see that even in an animal that doesn't have the ability to speak, it doesn't speak English, doesn't have a language to talk to us with, that we can actually modify their behavior with signals. And we'll talk a little bit in a second. The dog is drooling. And so salivation is the first part of digestion. So it's a critical biological thing that has to happen for a mammal's survival. We have to salivate. It is the first part of processing food into energy that keeps us alive. The activation of salivation is a psychological move. You don't actually have to put food into your mouth physically in order to start salivating. Some of you might even be salivating right now because I'm suggesting to you that we're going to be talking about food, and just thinking about salivating may actually cause it to happen. The dog might react to a can opener or going to the closet to get food the same way, the cat comes running when they hear the can opener. If a dog knows that they're going to get something to eat, the salivation will begin. So you can actually induce a physiological response to a psychological stimuli. A sight, a sound, a smell can induce your body to salivate. It can also elevate your heart rate. If you hear a particular sound, think about a soldier from the war that has sensitivity to loud noises. From hearing bombs or guns or things like that may induce memories. These are all kinds of things that we'll talk about in this process. The first one of these perspectives is the behavioral perspective. That mental processes are unobservable. You can't see anything. So you can only study measurable behaviors, things you can see and that you can count and you can check off on a list. Behaviorists believe that human behavior is learned and we can alter it with rewards and punishments, right? The timeout chair for a small child, the putting a star on your paper when you did a good job, and the pat on the back, the giving you a trophy when you gave a good effort at your little league with your little league team. All those ideas that we can give rewards, we can also give punishments too. Or like, you're grounded if you are not back home before curfew or something like that. So we use rewards and punishments to amend and change and alter human behavior. Remember the goals of psychology, right? The goal to define, to explain, to predict, and to promote. So a behaviorist is very much into the idea of promoting behavior by using that system of rewards and punishments. And Ivan Pavlov, we'll talk about him in our learning unit. He was the one that actually was studying dogs and their digestive process. And he discovered that ringing a bell could be associated with receiving food. And he noticed that dogs were salivating before they even got their food. So you can actually have something that's not food that actually ignites the digestive process in a person or an animal's body. John Watson said that humans can be socialized through learning, so patterns of stimulus and response. So when a certain thing happens, there is an appropriate response to it, not unlike when the ringing of the bell indicates that it's time for you to move from one class to another. That's a stimulus. So we can socialize you. We can train you to behave appropriately in class. We can do things like paint white lines on the road that indicate where you can cross the street. And people will follow those patterns and behaviors. Even if somebody is not from a city and doesn't have any idea about crosswalks and things like that, they can observe the other people following rules and then they'll conform. So the socialization process, all behaviors are learned and that they can be manipulated, rewards, punishments, application of a stimulus, and to generate a certain response. B.F. Skinner takes that a step further, and he strengthens what was called classical conditioning. something like Pavlov's dog and turns it into what they call operant conditioning, where there's operant means that there's an operation, a step. You do these steps and you gradually can change a person's behavior. So look at the quote at the, maybe my picture's in the way. So very useful if you want to build a better girlfriend or boyfriend. So check out the next slide. This is a clip from the famous TV show. It's not your favorite TV show. I don't know why it isn't, because it's a great show. And here is a clip from The Big Bang Theory about operant conditioning.
Are you finished?
Well, thank you. How fun. Would you like a chocolate?
Yeah, sure. Thanks.
The stimulus.
Oh, sorry, Sheldon. I almost sat in your spot.
Did you? I didn't notice. Have a chocolate.
Thank you.
Pairing the stimulus with desired behavior.
You're here a lot now.
Oh, am I talking too much? I'm sorry. Zip.
Thank you. Chocolate?
Yes, please. Oh, hey, Kim. Yeah, you know what? Hold on. Let me take this in the hall. You'll never guess who they got to replace you at work.
Okay. I know what you're doing.
Really?
Yes. You're using chocolates as positive reinforcement for what you consider correct behavior.
Very good. Chocolate?
No, I don't want it. Sheldon, you can't train my girlfriend like a lab rat.
Actually, it turns out I can.
Well, you shouldn't.
There's just no pleasing you, is there, Leonard? You weren't happy with my previous approach to dealing with her, so I decided to employ operant conditioning techniques, building on the works of Thorndike and B.F. Skinner. Yet by this time next week, I believe I can have her jumping out of a pool, balancing a beach ball on her nose.
No, this has to stop now.
I'm not suggesting we really make her jump out of a pool. I thought the bazinga was implied. I'm just tweaking her personality, just sanding off the rough edges, if you will.
No, you're not sanding Penny.
Are you saying that I am forbidden from applying a harmless, scientifically valid protocol that will make our lives better?
Yes, you're forbidden.
Bad, Leonard. You know,
So in that, you see both the positive and the negative aspect of operant conditioning. That if it's a bad behavior, you punish it, like with the squirt bottle. But if it's a good behavior, you reward it with chocolate. And pretty soon, you can actually take away the rewards and the behavior will remain in place. Very similar to teaching a dog how to train a dog how to sit or to stay. Humans do respond to operant conditioning to a certain degree. So the second perspective is the humanistic or humanist perspective. Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow are the two famous humanist pioneers, and they talk about individuals wanting to reach their own potential, that we have an internal motivation, that we have drives. So this builds on an earlier idea from Sigmund Freud, actually, that we have drives. There are things that we just biologically have. Now, this is different than behaviorists, because a behaviorist would say that's not true, right? A behaviorist would say all of our behavior is learned. We learn it from observing and watching other people and things. But a humanist does acknowledge, okay, we learn things, but we have drives. We have things that we are driven to do: eat, sleep, reproduce, all of those kinds of, and so then our behaviors, we might learn the behaviors, but they're associated with a drive. So we want to reach our potential. We're driven to succeed, right? To be comfortable, to be happy, to to be successful in the things that we do. And Carl Rogers put a lot of emphasis on free choice as part of that process, that we are not a slave to our drives. We can alter the path that we take, but nevertheless, we do have these internal motivations. Maslow actually made a hierarchy of them, and he heavily influences motivation. So if any of you here are going to become a teacher, you're going to learn about Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is right here in this pyramid. In order to climb to the top of the pyramid, to be a person that reaches your full potential, you have to meet the needs of the lower level of the pyramid first. Physiological needs are the most basic: food, water, shelter, clothing, sleep. The functional things you need to literally stay alive, to be able to continue to breathe and function and move about. Okay. Needless to say, the most important concern in education, in any school, is food insecurity. If a person comes to school and they haven't eaten in a day or two, and some of your classmates may in fact be in that position. You may have been in that position where you didn't necessarily know if where your next meal was going to come from. That is a very disturbing and very upsetting position to be in. So needless to say, it would be pretty hard to pay attention to a lesson in psychology class if you're hungry. It's very hard to think that United States history is important at all if you don't have a home to go home to. Safety needs, again, that's very similar to physiological needs, but next level up, having a home, knowing that you're safe from any kind of abuse or violence, all of those kinds of things would be the next level up. Then we start seeing psychological needs, having friends and being in relationships and loving things or people, having those things or people love you back or give you joy. Those are the next level up. So again, in education, it can't be all work and no play. We've learned over the years that you need to be able to have a little bit of a good time associated with the things that you have to do. That's why we have sports and clubs and activities, and we encourage people to do that to build a stronger psychological connection to school. Then as we move up to the top of the pyramid, that's where self-actualization comes in. Somebody that is operating at optimal strength, right? You're using all of your brain power, you're using all of your emotional power and social power, and you're able to function as good as you as an individual are going to be able to do. All of the things further down the pyramid are met, taken care of, no problem, and life is good. We'll talk about it in the motivation unit a little bit more, but it's not an absolute. It's not like once you reach the top of the pyramid, you stay there. You could lose your job. You could have an illness. There's a lot of things that can happen, and people can move up and down this pyramid on a zigzag or in the moment kind of situation. The psychodynamic perspective is the third perspective. This comes out of Sigmund Freud. We mentioned him very quickly in the last class when we were talking about psychoanalysis. And psychoanalysis is kind of looking at the story that is going on inside your head. And the psychodynamic perspective involves trying to bring the unconscious out into the conscious. this separates. This is why Sigmund Freud is so powerful in the history of psychology. He has views on many of these perspectives. The psychosexual stuff is not part of the psychodynamic perspective. That's more of a developmental psychology issue. But its emphasis is on repressed memories. There are things from your past that affect your present. And I think we all know that's actually pretty true, right? We know that both traumatic events, things that are very negative, but also things that are very positive that happened to you in the past can shape the way you are now. So what that means too is the things that you experience now are going to impact you in the future. So as teachers, we can pay attention to the things that we say and the things that we do, because we know it'll have an impact on our students. Potentially harmful, but also potentially unlocking a lot of your strengths too. So we look at it that way. So using things like free association, dream interpretation, that was a big part of Freud, to say, what's going on inside your head? Where are your thoughts? And you get the proverbial, lay down on the couch and let me ask you questions, showing you pictures and asking you what kind of thoughts do they invoke. The ink blot test, the Rorschach ink blot test, are nonsensical photos or paintings that don't necessarily mean anything, but it asks people to find representations of things that are going on in their mind. And what that is intended to do, and why this is so useful today, is it can initiate some conversation. So, how are you feeling? How are you today? What's on your mind? And that can start a stream of consciousness or a flow that can maybe give a psychologist some insight to what's going on and help people process feelings. Psychoanalysis and the psychodynamic perspective are useful for helping to treat emotional or mental disorders, but they're also good for episodic things, just momentary times of stress. If you lost a loved one and you saw a psychologist to help deal with grief. Grief is not a psychological disorder. It's a very normal part of human emotion, but on the other hand, having somebody to be able to help you through it. I mean, that's the kind of thing that comes out of the psychodynamic perspective. We have another clip from The Big Bang Theory. And this is kind of a playful way Leonard is trying to help Sheldon overcome a fear of speaking in public. And he decided to use the psychodynamic perspective and use psychoanalysis. So watch and enjoy this part. Try that again. There we go.
So, Sheldon? How you doing?
That's how you start a psychotherapy session. How am I doing? I was promised a riverboat journey into the jungles of my subconscious. Instead, I get the same question I hear from the lady who slices my bologna at Ralph's.
I'm sorry, I'll start again.
Would it be helpful to you if I told you about my dreams?
I don't know, maybe.
I recently had a dream that I was a giant, but everything around me was to scale, so it all looked normal.
How did you know you were a giant if everything was to scale?
I was wearing size 1,000,000 pants.
Why don't we just talk?
The talking cure, classical Freudian, good choice. If it will help speed things along, my answers to the standard Rorschach ink blot test are A, a bat, B, a bat, C, a bat, and D, my father killing my mother with a hypodermic needle.
Why don't I just start? Sometime.
So yeah, just kind of a playful look at it, but I love that show. And I've got one more clip coming up a little bit later on. The biological perspective. This is where we can get into kind of a fun conversation that we'll repeat through some of our future units on nature versus nurture. The biological perspective indicates that it is almost an entire internal process that determines our behavior. So very much the opposite of behavioral. Behavioral says that everything is caused by action, that we're responding to action, and everything we do is learned. But the biological perspective is that our biochemistry, the chemicals and the electrical impulses, everything from our blood cholesterol level, our heart rate, our all of these things will guide our behaviors, that all of our behaviors are in response to a physiological going on, something that's in there. So if you behave a certain way, we often say, well, did you get that from your mother or did you get that from your father? You know, I want an interesting thing. I was raised by a single mom. My dad was not part of our lives really for my entire my entire life of knowing him. He left home when I was about 5 years old. So, and that's not a I'm over it. It's okay. But the thing that's funny about the story is that I don't like mayonnaise, I don't like mustard, and I don't like salad dressing. I do like ketchup. So I'll put ketchup on a hot dog or a hamburger or something like that, or French fries. But no vinegar, no salad dressing, no mayonnaise, no mustard. And I remember my grandmother saying when I was a teenager, well, that's it, because neither did your father. My father didn't like any of those things either, apparently. Now, that was not something that was learned. So even taste, a sense of the foods that you like and dislike, that can be a trait that can be inherited, that is definitely nature. The fact that we look like our parents sometimes, right? I do look very much like my father. And so there's you inherit your physical traits and qualities. You can inherit, if anybody has been in the Ancestry or 23andMe, and taken the test to find out some of your traits and where you may have inherited them. That's really what biological perspective is all about. Genetics is playing a big role in the revival of the biological perspective. When I was becoming a teacher in the late 1980s and early 1990s, we wouldn't have talked about biology at all as a trait that we should understand in the learning process, teaching and learning process, but now we do. We can learn a lot about our students by getting to know their parents. And even within that, there's a cool debate as to, well, did people learn things from their parents because their parents are around them a lot, and especially in the formative years, teaching them their values and their beliefs and their attitudes? Or did they come by those things completely by nature? I can say that my father and I were two very different people in a lot of our attitudes and values. But in some of the biological traits like taste, we have a lot in common. So, is the truth somewhere in the middle, that we are governed by our nature, like our nature may predispose us to be a certain way, but we can learn to adapt or change and manipulate our nature. Everybody has a nature, and I can promise you that as somebody that has watched two children being born. I was there the moment both of my children came into the world. In fact, my son, as he was being born, the doctor said to me, he said, "Hey, get over here, catch him." And, needless to say, I didn't think that was a moment to test my old baseball skills. and I didn't have my glove. So I was a little nervous about that. I didn't want his first experience to be dad dropping him on the floor. But I can say this. My daughter was born with her eyes open. When she was born, her eyes were wide open, and in the first moments of her life, she was looking. She was taking in sensations through vision. Her head was moving, and she was looking. I can also say too that she was at 3 weeks old, and if anybody's mom is listening, they might be very jealous of this. My daughter at 3 weeks old was sleeping 7 hours a night. And so anybody that has had a child and they say, oh, 3 weeks into her life, she would sleep through the night without waking up and wanting. Yep, she did. My son, on the other hand, was not like that. He was every 2 hours like clockwork. So there is a biologically ingrained personality, and we have different abilities, qualities, traits that are there from birth. And if you've witnessed them, if you have a little brother or sister or niece or nephew or neighbor, observe those things in the very youngest of humans, and you can see, that biology is definitely playing a role. So biological psychologists are interested in how those forces inside our body determine behavior. I will be talking a lot in the near future about food, drink, sleep, exercise, all of these things that affect your body chemistry, medication, drug use. We know that if we tamper with and manipulate our inner chemistry, our biochemistry, we can change behaviors. We know that everything from circadian rhythm, like your sleep pattern, affects your behavior. A menstrual cycle affects your behavior. All of these things are biologically driven. So the truth of the matter is we can talk about behaviorism, biological psychology, humanistic psychology. The truth is probably a connection of all of them that affect the way we behave. The cognitive perspective, right? The cognitive is more in the realm of thinking. Cognition is thinking. So a cognitive process is your thought process. It is the way you gather, store, and process the information that you see. So if you sat down and you watched, today was the inauguration of Joe Biden as our next president. He is now our president. So if you sat down and you watched the events of that unfold, and you saw the ceremony and you listened to the words, and you're gathering information, you're storing it, and you're connecting it to other things that you think, you believe, your beliefs and your values and your opinions, and it's going to create a perspective. It's going to create a reaction or a feeling, based on your own previous experience and so forth. Your intellectual capabilities, all of that. That's your cognitive process. But how you can control behavior. That is essentially what the cognitive perspective is all about. Your thinking influences your behavior. You can control your behavior. My grandfather quit smoking when he was probably in his late 50s, maybe 60-ish. And he would often say, I just got up one day and I said, I quit. Cold turkey, no, nothing about it. He just thought about it and said, I don't want to do this anymore. A cognitive psychologist would say, okay, he did some rationalizing, he thought it through, he thought about the cost, he thought about how it made him feel, and just decided he didn't need it anymore, right? And just by thinking through the process, he could adjust his behavior. Doesn't necessarily mean it's not hard. There are biological connections to addictions and so forth, but regardless, how you think can affect your behavior. So I'm going to go on with one more clip from The Big Bang Theory. And this is Amy Farrah Fowler is going to use cognitive behavioral therapy on Sheldon to try to get him to end his obsessive compulsive need for closure. And it's kind of a fun little series here.
For the sake of argument, let's say I have a problem. What would be your plan for addressing it?
I'm going to recondition your brain so that the need for completion isn't so overwhelming.
By playing tic-tac-toe.
Yep, your turn.
Oh, Amy. And you wonder why people think neuroscience is nothing but a goofy game for diaper babies. Tic-tac-toe can only end in win, lose, or draw, none of which will deny me closure. Especially since I'm about to win. Well, we didn't finish.
Exactly. For the land of the free and the home of the... Next. It's quite an impressive layout, isn't it?
Yes.
Let's box it up.
Let's box it up.
That's enough.
Give it!
Okay, Sheldon, make a wish and blow out the candles. Oops, missed one. Now your wish can't come true.
Lucky for you, because I wished you were dead. Oh, yeah. There he is. And the home of bread. Don't stop. Yes, keep going. Just like that. Almost there. Almost there.
So Sheldon has issues with closure, and Amy was trying to make sure that he could work through those by understanding things through just processing it. Like, it's okay if the game didn't finish. It's okay if you didn't get all the candles blown out. So Piaget, that was the smiling guy on the Jean Piaget. Again, he's another one. If you're going to go into education, you're going to study a lot about him. Believes that cognitive development has these different pieces, and I'm a big believer in cognitive development theory from Piaget. You know, that everything has a schema. There are these concepts that are built in your brain called schema, and you might have a concept called war, right? And you know, you picture what war is like. Maybe you watched a war movie with your dad when you were little, and you know, you saw like World War II airplanes and so forth, and that was your schema of war. But then you get a new experience that is also called war, nuclear war, or hand-to-hand combat, or maybe you hear on a football game where they say that the teams are doing battle or they're at war. Maybe you play a card game that is called war. And so your schema of war starts to change through assimilating, by adding new information or by accommodating what you already know to learn that it can be things that look a little bit different. The Civil War and World War II are probably going to look very different, but they're both wars. And your brain starts to be able to make shortcuts based on some of these commonalities, almost like the Venn diagram of what is war all of the time, what are all of the traits sometimes in a modern war or in an ancient war or something like that. And that your body strives to create a balance, and how you process schema and how many schema you have and how they interact with one another. You might have a schema of Dwight Eisenhower, right? Dwight Eisenhower was a president of the United States, but he was also a general in World War II. So you can actually have a schema that overlaps with another one. And all of these things that are going on in your brain and how you process, how you categorize, how you organize information in your brain, that is cognitive theory of development. Processing many pieces of information can be confusing and confounding, frustrating, misleading. It's very easy to tell lies these days, as we can see with current events. Lies that are blatant lies can seem so truthful with their face value, but your brain will take shortcuts and will validate pieces of information because of something you previously understood or knew. And so we will be, when we get to the cognition unit, talking a lot about Piaget's theories. Quickly, there's a couple of smaller ones. A socio-cultural perspective, which takes into account the fact that people have come from different cultures and may see things differently because they come from different parts of the world. They eat different foods, they speak different languages, different religions, and so forth. Just take, for example, the schema of meat. You might say meat, and in the United States, you're thinking about a big cheeseburger, but maybe if you live in the Middle East, you might be thinking about the meat meal. I can't even remember what it's called, the one in the middle there. But if you're from Japan, maybe you're thinking about sushi as meat, because Japanese culture almost entirely depends upon fish as their protein, where in the United States we are almost entirely cow and chicken. So you might have a very, very different perspective based on your culture and how you were socialized. The evolutionary perspective is very closely related to the biological perspective, and it's about satisfying drives that are programmed into us as animals. Dating, for example. We know that, in a lot of cultures, and I grew up in a very Franco-American community where dating had a very distinct purpose. Our cultural perspective on dating, if you're 14 years old and two teenagers want to go out on a date, in the culture that I grew up in the time and place that I grew up in, there's only one purpose for that date, and that is this person compatible as a mate? If you're going to date them, it's not just a social activity. Dating is not recreational. Dating follows a very specific pattern, and the goal, the outcome, is who are you going to marry? Who is going to be the father or mother of their grandchildren, essentially, is what it is. So again, when you have this evolutionary perspective, it is not to say that something is right or wrong, because some people might hear my story and they say, well, that's a lot of pressure to be putting on a 14-year-old. Say, oh, we're going to go to the 8th grade prom together. Oh, are you going to marry her? I thought we'd get some punch and maybe some popcorn and we'd have a dance, but hadn't thought about the marriage piece yet. What are you going to name your kids and so forth? So, but an evolutionary perspective helps to shed some light on, for example, the acceptance or lack thereof of homosexuality. You know, that doesn't follow, if somebody has an evolutionary perspective, it doesn't follow their line of thinking to say that two people could be mates but not have offspring, not have children. So sometimes you have to introduce new concepts, like a gay couple can adopt. Maybe there are children that that don't have families, that need a family, and rather than be discarded as orphans, as they may have been, many years ago, that they could actually be raised in a loving family. But that actual concept does actually fit into an evolutionary perspective, but it does require change of schema. Like, what is a family? You know how we talked about that before in structuralism with what is a chair? What is marriage? But evolutionary is very much about those biological drives to survive or to continue to promote the species. Even in the Bible, you find go forth and multiply. It's in the first book of the Old Testament as a directive from God to say you've got to have kids. And so you see that, but also evolutionary perspective is less about socializing and it's more about survival instincts, things like that are defense mechanisms. Well, having children is a species defense mechanism to propagate and to promote the species. But what about having enough food? If you could actually do an experiment on this, you could go stake out at Hannaford or Shaw's within minutes of the prediction of a big nor'easter storm, a big ice storm or snowstorm, and watch people flood to the grocery stores to try and get water. When the pandemic started, the mad rush that people had to get toilet paper, right? The evolutionary perspective is the one that is most likely going to be able to explain that kind of behavior. Response to threats usually ends up in hoarding. And that's why places like Walmart had to say, you can only buy one package of toilet paper. You can only buy 2 bottles of disinfectant cleaner for your home to make sure that other people are going to be able to have them. But that's an evolutionary perspective. So the approaches to psychology do land on a continuum. This is a continuum. You have 2 extremes on the left and the right. You might say nature and nurture as the continuum. So on the nature side, you have biology. On the nurture side, you have behaviorism. And then as you come into the middle, cognitive psychology is where you would find the moderation of all of the theories working together, recognizing that there is some biology and there is some environmental influence on the way that we behave. So we put things together into a continuum like this. So those are the perspectives, and those are going to be woven into all of the units. So we don't really study them as standalone theories, other than to say, okay, if we're talking about motivation, what does that look like from a behavioral standpoint? What does it look like from a biological standpoint? We might be able to say that if you get a dose of adrenaline, your energy is going to be up, your heart rate is going to be up, you're going to be motivated to get something done physically, you're going to be more active. So we can say that, yeah, we can explain motivation from a biological perspective. We can also say motivation from a perspective of maybe somebody insulted you and said you can't do something. And so that energized you to say, well, I'm going to prove that person wrong. That's entirely a behavioral response to a stimuli. That has nothing to do with biology. necessarily. You could even argue that statement, right? But those approaches in the middle would bring the two together. So as we talk about motivation, learning, cognition, personality, we'll filter in all of these different perspectives. It's just kind of a starting place for people to go from psychology. The last thing I want to do is, and really this is the only slide to talk about careers in psychology. Is there a what do you do if you study psychology in college, for example, you major in psychology? There's the clinical and the counseling aspect of psychology where you could be a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a school counselor, a therapist, anything like that. In forensics, I like to use this example, and it's kind of a morbid example, but a gentleman passed away a few years ago, and he lived by himself. It's a true story. Guy lived by himself, and when he died by himself. It was an unattended death, as that's the official, legal term, I guess. So anytime there's an unattended death, there has to be an investigation. That investigation is forensics. It can be conducted by a police officer, or it can be conducted by some type of forensic specialist. If it's a crime scene, if the police determine that it appears to be foul play, or that somebody else may have been involved, and they're trying to figure out who that person could have been, that's forensics. But in the example that I'm talking about, there was no evidence of foul play, but there was a need for a coroner or a medical examiner to determine the cause of death. So here's the scenario. This person dies on their own. They had a computer that was turned on, and on the computer screen, when you moved the mouse and the screen woke up, what was visible on the screen was a document, and the person had typed in all of their passwords to their accounts and to their email address, everything, their bank accounts, how much money was in their bank accounts, insurance policies, all of that stuff that you would need to know if somebody dies. Right there on the computer screen. Not even written on a piece of paper. It's not like they could have written it days and days or even months in advance and just put it in a drawer. It was kind of like, something's going to happen in the next few minutes, and this is the stuff that whoever finds me is going to need to know. They found the person sitting in a chair. He had passed in a chair. And my cat wants to join the conversation here. He had multiple health problems, including cancer, congestive heart failure, COPD, obesity, was losing his eyesight. There were a lot of things going on medically. When they found him, there was a knife beside his chair. There was a loaded rifle on the couch next to him. There was a bottle of medication for his heart that was sitting right there. And all of his medication, he had been given, prescribed chemotherapy for his cancer. And so there were a lot of pills, a big bag of pills, several bottles. And not one of those pills had been taken. So a forensics person might look at that scenario and say, okay, what's going on here? The first thing that they determined was that there was no foul play. Nobody killed him. He died. They determined that the firearm had not been discharged. The knife had not been used. He was not cut in any way. So he might have taken a lethal dose of his heart medication. That's possible. He hadn't taken any of his chemotherapy medication. So basically, he was giving the indication that he was ready to die. He was an elderly man and lived alone, didn't really have any connections with a lot of other people. And so a forensics person is going to pick that apart for several reasons. First of all, to get a cause of death. The cause of death for this person ended up being gallbladder cancer. That's what was on his death certificate. Could have been a heart attack. It could have been suicide. It could have been a number of things in that scenario. They determined it was not relevant to know what the cause of death was. But they also wanted to be able to tell family members kind of the story of what happened. The family had to go into the home afterwards and clean up and pick up. The family was going to find the scene the same way the police saw it. So a forensic analysis was done so that counseling could be provided through the funeral home to the family to let them know that, essentially from a spiritual point of view in helping the family deal with a loss of a loved one, that it was he was ready to go, that he was at peace with it, and he was ready to go. So it's a little bit of a morbid story, but forensics is about dissecting a crime scene, dissecting the scene of an accident, and trying to evaluate, based on evidence, what has happened in the past. Forensics is also useful at predicting what will happen in the future. Somebody might do forensics on computers. They might look at, the riots in Washington, D.C. Forensic analysis of Facebook pages and Twitter accounts and things like that to get a history of people's behavior to see what might be things to expect in the coming future. That can inform law enforcement. That can inform places that might need to take caution or be careful of future events. Educational psychology is another big one. Obviously, it's a big one in my life. The teaching and learning process goes beyond classrooms, though. Educational psychology is very valuable if you want to be in marketing and sales. You have to teach people to like a product. You have to convince people to buy a product. So that involves a transfer of information, a transfer of attitudes and beliefs. And so educational psychology, how do you get that message across? Maybe you like sports. If you like sports, you have to like psychology. Many sports teams have sports psychologists on staff. If you like baseball, you might observe sometimes when the batter comes up to bat and they have these rituals with their batting gloves or tapping the bat or adjusting their helmet. They've probably been counseled by a sports psychologist to help them focus, to not be nervous, to be able to concentrate on the activity that they're doing in sports, but also the mentality of building self-confidence and being able to act under pressure and to handle some of the stressors associated with being an athlete. There's a lot that can be done there. But the most popular is industrial organizational psychology. It sounds the least glamorous. It's not as cool. They don't make a lot of TV shows about industrial organizational psychology. That's mostly forensics for things like CIS or Criminal Minds and things like that. But industrial organizational psychology is about human resources, hiring people to fit into certain jobs, helping coworkers to get along and work together, developing goals, mission statements, all of these kinds of things. Anytime you see the term human resources, you're talking about industrial organizational psychology. How you structure leadership in an organization, how you create teams within an organization or business. All of that stuff is really big. So if you're a journalist, if you're there's always specific types of psychology depending upon the industry that you're in. If you're going to be a nurse, if you're like a journalist also, right? how you deliver a message and how you get that message across and how you connect to your readers, your patients, your clients. All of those kinds of things do involve psychology. So there's a lot to do with psychology regardless of what you go into. So you don't have to, there's a lot of advice out there about what to do, what to major in college. And I can guarantee that if you looked it up on the internet, says, should I major in psychology? Try it. You're generally going to find out that it's going to say, no, you shouldn't. And the reason that they usually say you shouldn't major in psychology is because our society today is very focused on return on investment. And society loves college majors that exactly say what the job is that you're going to get when you complete that degree. For example, nursing. If you go to college and you major in nursing, you're going to be a nurse. That's it, right? If you major in education, you're going to be a teacher. That's what it's going to qualify you to do. Engineering, you're going to be an engineer. Engineering even has different types of engineering. Electrical engineering, you're going to be an electrical engineer. That's it, right? So, but if you major in psychology, unless you're going to be a psychologist, like I got that when I first graduated from college, I majored in history. Well, what are you going to do with a degree in history other than be a history teacher? Well, I became a history teacher. That's what I wanted to do. But, you major in history, and that's a good program to lead you towards a degree where you'll become a lawyer, right? Or if you want to work in politics or government, any of those kinds of things. History is a good degree. Psychology is a good degree no matter what you want to do. If you want to be a business person, a salesman, you want to work in insurance, you want to work in banking, psychology is a great degree to have. And because anything where you're working with people, if you're working with people, most companies in most industries will tell you, give me a qualified, capable person and we'll train them in what we want them to do. That's most industries. Education, for example, is unusual, where you have to actually have a certification from the state that says you are licensed to be this profession. Most professions don't have that. Whatever training or certification you need, they'll give you kind of on the job or when they find a good person. So psychology is a great major to pursue in college. I will just warn you, though, the fears that people have when they say, oh, psychology degrees don't amount to anything, some of that fear is justified. And the reason it is because you're not targeted to a specific industry, you don't have the inside track to any particular job. And so you've got to be good. You can't go to college and get C's and D's in psychology and expect to get a job. Your performance matters. And even though a psychology degree can be attained at the vast majority of universities, you still need to do well. And at the end of the process, once you receive your degree, finding a job depends upon your motivation and your aggression to go and find something related to the degree that you have. Most people that succeed and want a degree in psychology know that they want to work with people. They want to be in a human-oriented job where they're surrounded by lots of other people, where they have to influence people, right? So if that fits you, then psychology could be a very good approach for you. I hear lots of people say, I don't want to be a teacher, or I don't want to be a nurse. Some say, I want to work with my hands, or I want to work with people, or I want to work outdoors. Those are really important questions to ask. And if the answer is, I want to be around people, I want to influence people, I want to be kind of where there's action with other people, then psychology is a good approach to take. So there's a couple of websites on this slide, and you can always pause it and use those to to get a few more tidbits of information about psychology. That's an hour and 15 minutes, and I'm going to leave you with the last 15 minutes to get your exit ticket done and respond to those questions and share that. Today is January 20th, Wednesday, January 20th. So on Monday, we'll be coming back to class. If we are remote again, I will do live classes so that we can have some interaction. But just for today, I wanted to do the recording. So have a great rest of the week. I hope the remote learning experience is not dragging you down. I hope you're working through it. And look forward to seeing you guys again really soon. So take care, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.